Thank you for having us on this distinctive platform that brings so many different cultures and faiths together. As a documentary filmmaker who's been making films on art and culture, science and spirituality, corporate and social issues for about 3 decades now, as a classical dancer who's been soaked in tradition, and as a student of psychology who has this fascination for the human mind, I would like to share my views on the role of ethics in the crisis ridden situation today. As we know, justice is defined differently by different people, and morality being very subjective is difficult to universalize. Right and wrong, good and bad, are dependent on individual cultures and collective cultures which have developed over several decades, some even over centuries. Yet, there are certain universal principles that cut across all barriers that stress on maintaining dignity, equality, and independence, and that most of the major religions which have withstood the passage of time have something to say about. However, if we look around today, these moral lines seem to be getting increasingly blurred. What is perceived as an act of oppression and terror by several is perceived as a struggle for survival and upholding of traditions by several others. So, understanding how these diametrically opposite social views came into being, what led to their thought patterns, understanding how where these lines are to be drawn, understanding how these attitudes may develop in the future is all a very, very difficult task, but one that requires immediate attention. Now, is it possible to think of a common code of ethical conduct beyond the traditional barriers that we have created for ourselves? Some sort of a frame of mind which we can refer to when faced with an ethical dilemma. Decades ago, legendary poet Rabindranath Tagore described one such an ideal frame of mind in his Nobel Prize winning anthology, Geetanjali. A frame of mind that is so pure and undiluted, a frame of mind that everyone aspires to experience. So Tagore recites, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action. Into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Let's take a look at the relevance of Tagore's poem in today's scenario. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. A frame of mind where every individual can hold his head high up with a sense of self belief, a sense of self dignity, and that inner courage to be able to face anything in life. Where knowledge is free, where one is able to share what one knows transparently within relationships, between religions, between countries, a frame of mind where one is able to share willingly for the betterment of the world as a whole, without giving room to the emergence of 1,000 different conspiracy theories. Where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, Tagore says, where we stop making a fuss about your space, your principles, your religion, my religion, and look at a much larger perspective and focus on larger issues such as saving the planet from climate catastrophe. A state of mind where You feel so one with everything around to the point of knowing very well that if you're going to harm someone, you're actually harming yourself in some way because we're all interconnected. Where words come out from the depth of truth, where we develop the maturity and the responsibility to walk our talk, to mean what we say and to say what we mean, where we actually adhere to those innumerous peace treaties that we sign on, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where one strives constantly to do his best without holding on to those desperately to those recognitions for his effort, without constantly looking at that social media page to check on how many likes or how many hearts or claps that you have received. A state of mind where you do not compare yourself with people around you, but you keep asking yourself this question: have I given my best, or is there anything more that I can do at this point of time? Where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sands of dead habit, Tagore says. Where we develop the inner courage to come out of our comfort zones, to break those existing patterns and customs that are irrelevant today. Some of these customs may have been very essential for existence eons ago, but they are not only irrelevant, they are inappropriate and to a certain extent retrogressive today. And yet we hold on to them so tightly without letting them go. As a matter of false pride, without allowing any kind of reason to enter into our minds and evolve with time. And thereby we are going completely against nature, we are going completely against evolution. And evolution is the law of nature. As Charles Darwin so beautifully put it, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the ones that are most responsive to change. And so change we must, and get away from those dreary desert sands of dead habits, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, where the mind is led forward by universal principles and existential laws which are much beyond the barriers that we have created for ourselves, where the mind operates from a sense of maximum good for maximum people. Now, this poem was originally written in Bengali by Tagore and was meant as a prayer seeking for freedom of the country. And so the concluding line says, "Into that heaven of freedom, my father, let my country awake." Decades later, I would like to tweak it a little and say, "Into that heaven of freedom, my father, let humanity awake." As we observe around us, there seems to be a resurgence of major traditions and the new sprout of innovative religions that are all contributing to the notion of we would like to make a difference to the world, or we want to make a difference to the world. No questions asked about the intentions here, which are all very noble, but there are a lot of apprehensions about the processes that are being followed to achieve these goals, which many are not even aware of. Many people believe that dedication and devotion to their own traditions requires hostility and rejection of other faiths and their practitioners as well, which is totally not necessary. One need not become a Christian in order to love Christ. One need not become a Hindu in order to believe in karma. You could follow your own paths and still respect the other paths and love their practitioners as well. There is this groundbreaking survey, nationwide survey conducted in India by the Pew Research Center, funded by the John Templeton Foundation, which explores how Indians think and feel about their own faiths and about the faiths of their fellow citizens. Now, more than 3 years in the making, the key findings are based on 30,000 face-to-face interviews of individuals who conducted in about 17 languages across the country in the late 2019 and early 2020. Let me quickly read a few highlights about the key findings of this report to you. According to the survey, more than 80% of India's general population and more than three-quarters of respondents in each of the 6 religious groups the survey covered said that respecting all religions is very important to being truly Indian. You get the sense that Indians prefer a concept of pluralism more like a patchwork quilt with clear lines of segregation between religious communities. And yet, one of the most fascinating findings of the study was the extent to which members of different groups had beliefs more similar to Indians of other faiths than to members of their own faiths in other parts of the world. For example, Muslims in India were just as likely as Hindus to say they believe in karma, 77% each, despite the concept's roots in Hinduism's foundational texts. In northern India, 12% of Hindus and 10% of Sikhs, along with 37% of Muslims, identify with Sufism, a mystical tradition closely associated with Islam. If you just take a look at the data, it's surprising, says Neha Sehgal, the Associate Director of Research for the Pew Research Center. Despite the fact that people live highly religiously segregated lives, perhaps as a consequence of living side by side for so long, belief systems have just found a way to permeate those patchwork lines, she says. Now, this whole process of searching for shared values across traditional boundaries, across religious faiths, depends to a great extent on how truthful we are in accepting the prevalent diversity, in how we are able to accept the clearly demarcated lines. Are we going to look at this as an obstacle to be overcome or as a potential for growth? Now, the Pew Research Survey categorically shows the presence of these shared values across religious boundaries, and it kind of reiterates the shaping of what Carl Jung refers to as the collective unconscious, a phenomenon which occurs by a connective principle that he refers to as synchronicity. According to Carl Jung, collective unconscious is the collection of thoughts and images of one's ancestral experience at birth, which he shares with humanity at large. Now, this phenomenon of sharing occurs by a scientific principle called spontaneous synchronization, which is a remarkable naturally occurring effect in nature, whereby a group of oscillating units, in this case humans, who occur in their naturally different frequencies, but when they are interacting with each other, they exhibit collective oscillations of a common frequency. Now, this perhaps explains the forming of the collective unconscious. The next question that pops up is, what about the ancestry of India could have led to this patchwork quilt with clearly segregated lines scenario as described by the Pew Research Survey? I wonder if we could call this detached attachment. Let's take a look at how this phenomenon could have evolved into the current scenario. Ancient Hindu texts say that the visible world exists in the invisible reality from which it is derived. Now, this invisible reality is called Brahman in Sanskrit, meaning infinite. So, the Hindu texts speak about the universe as a multiplication of one, the Brahman, which manifests into many. In short, the world of diversity owes its origins to a single source, a single reality. So the ethical implications of this is that the universe with all its living beings actually form a single community, what in Sanskrit we call Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, meaning the world is one family. Now this means that we are relational beings and our well-being depends on each other. Why? Because right and wrong and truth and falsity of an individual's behavior cannot be entirely absolute. It depends on how our culture and orientation view the subject of goodness. And that brings us back to the community being the matrix of development. Now, Hinduism is a way of life that is based on Sanatana Dharma, which can be broadly translated as eternal best practices. There are two foundational principles that help one adhere to the ethical way of life: the concept of karma and the concept of ahimsa. Karma is nothing but the law of cause and effect, which can be described as every thought and intention has consequences. Now, we're not talking only about physical actions here, we're also talking about ethical and moral actions and intentions. So, it kind of makes you responsible because you know that every thought and action of yours is consequential. And once again, we are not talking only about the short term consequences here, we are also talking about the long term outcomes which are generated much after you stop walking the planet. So it's kind of an eternal quest to understand and live the life of moral character, acquiring virtues through practice along the way. There are no magic formulas. Every situation is different. By honing virtuous practices and by aligning yourself to existential laws, people are able to make their best choices when faced with an ethical challenge. As Swami Vivekananda so beautifully puts it, neither money pays, not name, nor fame, nor learning. It is character that cleaves through adamantine walls of difficulties. Now, the next principle is the concept of ahimsa, which can be broadly translated as non-violence. But it's not just pertaining to absence of physical violence, is much more than that. It also means not interfering with the peace of the other, not intruding into the space of the other, which actually means harmonious coexistence. Now, that explains the detached attachment attitudes and the patchwork quilt with clearly segregated lines scenario as described by the Pew Research Center. Now, let's quickly recap what we have discussed so far. We aspired for an ideal frame of mind as seen by Tagore. We saw the possibilities of harmonious coexistence as shown by the Pew Research Survey. We spoke about the two concepts of ahimsa and karma, which aid in harmonious coexistence. Now, let's move on to the role of ethics in corporate culture, which is very crucial because 2/3 of our lives are spent at our workplace and we so identify with the brands and the corporate that we represent. So, what are the moral frameworks in a corporate culture? In 1994, author and entrepreneur John Elkington built upon the concept of triple bottom line with the hope of transforming the existing financial accounting based business system to a more comprehensive approach to measure impact and success. Now, this is a very widely used approach, the triple bottom line approach, which is also referred to as the 3 Ps: people, planet, and profits. To ensure that everyone lives a prosperous and fulfilling life, and to ensure the social, economic, and technological progress occurs in tandem with nature, the United Nations has come up with Sustainable Development Goals. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all the UN member states in 2015, provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for the planet and its people. At its heart are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are an urgent call to all the countries, both developed and developing. The corporate sector plays a very essential role in this because developing interdisciplinary sustainability strategies are at the core of management. We have here with us today someone who has a very rich and varied experience of over 3 decades in several sectors, including oil and natural gas, coal, power, renewable energy, and regulatory affairs. Let's hear from Mr. Rakesh Kumar, the Chairman and Managing Director of NLCIL, about the strategies adopted for sustainable development and, more importantly, the strategies adopted to handle crisis situations ethically.
NLC India Limited is a state-owned enterprise in India categorized into Navratna category, which is the second highest category of Government of India. And we are engaged in the business of mining of lignite and coal and power generation, which is thermal, lignite based and coal based. And now we have also entered into renewable energy in a big way. The 17 goals mentioned in the UN wheel of SDG, our business processes are dealing with most of the goals. When we talk about water, our mining operations necessitate management of huge quantum of water, which we usually deploy for the purpose of irrigation of some 25,000 acres of land around our projects, 40 villages. We are taking care of the water requirement of township and also supplying water, clean water to the metropolitan city of Chennai, which is 200 kilometers away. Coming to the next goal, point number 7, generation of clean energy. After commencing our business operations from lignite and power based on lignite mines, then diversifying into coal-based power generation, we diversified towards more environmental friendly energy, which is solar. And starting the first small project of 10 megawatt in 2015, we commenced our journey into the renewable energy, which is very, very competitive, but at the same time is very useful for the society. And we set up solar projects to the extent of 1,400 megawatt in the state of Tamil Nadu, which is giving huge quantum of energy in a clean way. Coming to the next goal, point number 10, reduced inequalities. There is a very big initiative on the part of the company some 2 decades back that we started taking care of the differently abled children in one of the institutions created and funded by NLC called Sneha Opportunities. This institution takes care of 80 differently abled children. We are not only bringing them in the mainstream of life, making them feel that they are living normal life, but also they are made to take care of themselves. They become employable and eventually they lead normal life also. There are examples that such children are able to have a happy married life, and they do have children also. Another sustainable development goal of good health and well-being, our company has taken an initiative recently of setting up institution named Anand Elam, a senior citizen home where we are accommodating the needy senior citizens who have been eventually abandoned by their children or by the society, and they really need a helping hand at that stage of their life. So we give them a very respectful living, quality food, good entertainment, their medical treatment and interaction with the various stakeholders in a very respectful manner, so that they should get after the fag end of their life what they deserve from the society. And this institution is also run on a self-sustainable basis. After the initial corpus of 10 crore by the company, rupees 10 crore by the company, every employee is contributing 20 rupees from their salary every month, which is sufficient to take care of their needs. Let us look at the Sustainable Development Goal number 12, Sustainable Consumption and Production. We have eventually used huge land for mining operations over the last 6 decades. And when the land is mined out and it is abundant, it has to be rejuvenated. It has to be made fertile again. It has to be redone in such a way that the land can be reused by the farmers, by the people for agriculture purposes or for other uses. Therefore, we started another initiative that the mined out land is leveled and the topsoil of the future acquisition of land is taken and transported to fill up the reclaimed land, and eventually this land is used for the agricultural purposes. We are deploying Israeli technology of agriculture to revive the fertility of the land by deploying the project affected people, by making them trained in the use of technology, trained in the use of agricultural processes, and the yield of agriculture eventually grows and fertility is restored. And this yield is used in the workers' canteen, in the township, and to distribute the vegetables and cereals to the stakeholders surrounding villages. This way, we are not only making the land reusable, but also developing the skill of people, creating employment opportunities for the stakeholders, and eventually the cost of lignite or coal is also reduced, which helps us to generate competitive power. We have experienced the management of crisis in an ethical way, in a big way, the last 1.5 years, when the whole world is reeling under the pandemic situation. Our company was also, but we were obligated to continue our mining operations and power generation because power is considered to be the essential in this challenging time. Therefore, we had to realign our policies, our business processes. We had to take care of the people working, that they are protected from the spread of pandemic. At the same time, we were going out of the way to take care of the workmen. The ethical component comes into the play when we deal with wages of workers for not working. Their transportation, leaving them back to their native, taking care of their vaccination and treatment, providing the necessary medicines and oxygen and doctor treatment, beds and vaccination to each and every stakeholder, irrespective of whether the company is obligated to provide or not. Another example of crisis management with ethics is during the pandemic situation when we started facing shortage of oxygen beds, shortage of doctors, paramedical staff, medicines. The crisis was growing, a number of patients were increasing, and there was no availability of beds and oxygens and these essentials in the nearby areas also. Then our team sprung into action. We started converting the non-oxygen beds of the hospital, our hospital, 350-bed hospital, into oxygen beds. We started creating our schools into COVID care centers. In a record period of 9 days, we recruited doctors and nurses to augment our health team. We started getting medicines by approaching the top companies their top managements directly. And in a record time, we set up an oxygen plant which was converted and connected to the hospital by our own team of engineers of thermal power stations with the help of a oxygen plant manufacturer nearby. And this has helped to overcome the situation in such a way that not a single stakeholder of NLC India Limited ever faced the shortage of any bed, oxygen, critical drugs or vaccination. In the course of our business, sometimes we face the crisis in the form of fatal industrial accident. And in such situations, the crisis management needs to be done very carefully with lot of emotions, compassion, taking care of human values and going out of the way to take care of any damage which can be reduced, brought to the minimum, and extra care for the stakeholders. In such difficult situations of industrial accidents, joining of all the stakeholders, be it the workmen involved, the trade unions, the political leaders, other stakeholders, investigating agencies, employees and management, all of them must join together to resolve the crisis in the most ethical manner. There are no defined rules, defined solutions to the crisis or problems. Sometimes these ethical thinking can be a trap, can create another crisis, can complicate the situation. Then rules and regulations will not align. Those things will come in the way. Any leader who needs to deal with crisis must have empathy, must have the human connect, a very prompt, transparent communication with the stakeholders, risk-taking capacity, and going beyond the rules and regulation wherever it is needed to protect the human values. I would like to share a video film on such crisis, how we have dealt in NLCIL.
We have grown in a land that for centuries believes the world is one family. This timeless ethos percolates into our corporate culture across the public and private sector. Even as NLCIL embodies benchmark systems, technological optimization and operational excellence, we accentuate on nurturing our biggest asset, our human capital of 12,000 direct employees and 13,000 contract workmen. Very little needs to be done when all is well, but a lot needs to be done at times of adversity.
Due to the lockdown, the labor got panicked. They were emotionally charged to leave their families. Around 4,000 workmen wanted to go to their native places. We started the work with available manpower, 350 or 400 workmen. We motivated the employees who were working and staying in their native places. By August, September, October, the strength of the labor has increased more than the pre-COVID periods. It has reached today around 8,500.
During those unfortunate times when accidents happen, despite safety measures in place, we introspect. Do we have our priorities in place? Are we transparent about crisis communication?
At the time of crisis, because of the uncertainties, because of the shocks, the trust level of the stakeholders will reach its lowest. In order to restore the trust, upfront, transparent communication by the leader is a must.
Are we accepting responsibility without denying or evading the issue? Are we taking measures of care for the victims' families?
எனக்கு இவ்வளோ ஹெல்ப் பண்ணாங்க சிஎம்டி சார், அமலா மேடம்லாம். அவங்களாம் இல்லைன்னா நான் இருக்கவே மாட்டேன். நான் இந்த அளவுக்கு இருக்கேன் அப்படின்னாலே அவங்க தான் காரணம். என் ஃபேமிலி சைடில் இருந்த பிரச்சனை எப்படி ஃபேஸ் பண்ணணும்னு எனக்கு சொல்லி கொடுத்தாங்க. எப்படி போல்டாக இருக்கணும், இனிமேல் குழந்தைக்காக நீ இருக்கணும் அப்படின்னு சொன்னாங்க.
அப்போது அப்பா இறந்துட்டாங்கன்னு சொல்லும்போது எனக்கு கண்ணிலேருந்து அழுக கூட, கண்ணீர் கூட வரல. மயக்கம் வருது, வாமிட் சென்ஷன் வருது, ஒரு மாதிரி ஆகிட்டேன். நான் ஏதோ பித்து பிடிச்ச மாதிரியே உட்காந்துருந்தேன் அப்போது.
ஏன்னா எனக்கு வந்து இருக்கிறதும் 2 குழந்தைங்க, சின்ன குழந்தைங்க. மேரேஜ் ஆகி 4 இயர் தான் ஆச்சு. பட்டு நான் என்ன பண்ணுறதுன்னு தெரியாத இருந்தேன். அப்போ தான் என்எல்சிலேருந்து எங்களுக்கு வந்து ஹெல்ப் பண்ணாங்க. நஷ்டஈடு அமௌண்ட்டும் கொடுத்தாங்க, வேலையும் கொடுத்தாங்க. அது கொஞ்சம் யூஸ்ஃபுல்லாக இருந்துச்சு. எங்களுக்கு கொஞ்சம் கடன் இருந்துச்சு, அடைச்சிட்டேன். கொஞ்சம் மனதைரியம் வந்து ஏற்படுத்தி கொடுத்தாங்க.
அப்பா போயிட்டாரு அப்படின்னதுக்கப்புறம் எங்களுக்கு ஒன்றுமே இல்லை, நாங்கள் அவ்வளோதான் அப்படின்னு நினச்சிட்டு இருந்தோம் மேம். எங்கள் அம்மாவை நான் எப்படி நல்ல நிலைமை கொண்டு வருவேன்னு தெரியாத அளவுக்கு ரொம்ப இருந்தோம் மேம். வீடும் அதேமாரி காலி பண்ணணும்னு சொல்லிட்டு இருந்தாங்க. அப்புறம் சிஎம்டி சார்கிட்ட நாங்கள் எல்லாத்தையும் பேசி அதுக்கப்புறம் நாங்கள் அந்த வீடை கொடுத்தாங்க மேம்.
All of us joined hands, all the employees, all the workmen decided to contribute voluntarily their one-day salary, which was after contribution much more than the requirement, and 65% of the one-day salary was refunded back after meeting the requirement of making the compensation at a very respectful level. That has given a moral boost, a feeling of joining together and fighting the crisis.
இந்த ஹார்ட் ஆஃப் லிவிங் கிளாஸ் ரொம்ப எதுக்குடா கூப்பிட்றாங்க, நம்ம இருக்கிற சுச்சுவேஷனில் இதெல்லாம் போகணுமா அப்படின்னு நினச்சேன். வந்ததுக்கப்புறம் தான் நம்ம ஏன் இதெல்லாம் நினைக்கும், இதெல்லாம் மறந்துட்டு இனிமேல் இருக்கிற லைஃப்பை பார்க்கணும் அப்படின்ற அளவுக்கு எனக்கு இந்த கிளாஸ் ரொம்ப ஹெல்ப்ஃபுல்லாக இருந்துச்சு. நான் மறக்கவே மாட்டேன் இந்த கிளாஸு.
நீங்கள் வீட்டிலே இருக்க வேண்டாம், வீட்டிலே இருந்தீங்கன்னா நீங்கள் அப்படியே தான் இருப்பீங்க அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு, சரி உங்களுக்கு அந்த ஆர்ட் ஆஃப் லிவிங் ப்ரோக்ராம் அரேஞ்ச் பண்ணி தரோம் அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு அரேஞ்ச் பண்ணி கொடுத்தாங்க மேம். உண்மையாக அது வந்துட்டு அந்த டைமில் அந்த பெரிய ஒரு இதுலேருந்து வெளியில் வர்றதுக்கு அது ரொம்பவே யூஸ்ஃபுல்லாக இருந்துச்சு மேம்.
Management tried their best to give the proper routine back for us. I can't able to convey it through words that whatever happened in the class, it's magic or whatever we can say. I was given respect. I was treated as an educated. I was treated as an engineer. They have nobody said to me in my face that you have joined in a compensation ground. I'm given space to work. If my father was there, means he will be very happy that I was wearing NLCL uniform and I was working in the Learning and Development Center. He will be the most happiest man in the world. I am very sure that in next 35 years of my service, I will go places.
வேலைக்கு நான் ட்ரை பண்ணேன். பட்டு இந்த மாதிரி நான் எதிர்பார்க்கல. இது வந்து எதிர்பார்க்காத ஒன்று. என் ஒய்ஃபுக்கு வந்து வேலை வாங்கி கொடுக்கணும்னு அவர் தான் எய்மாக இருந்தார். அவரும் எதிர்பார்க்கல, நானும் எதிர்பார்க்கல. ஆனால் அவர் மூலயமா தான் வரணும்னு இருந்த விதி. இங்கே வேலைக்கு வர்றதுனால நம்ம புது புது விஷயத்தை வந்து ஆஃபீஸில் கற்றுக்குறோம். அதனால் வந்து மைண்டு மாறுது.
எனக்கு ஃபஸ்ட்டு டைம் நான் இங்கே ட்ரைனிங் பீரியட் அப்போ வந்தப்போ எனக்கு ஃபஸ்ட்டு ஃபீல் ஆச்சது என்னென்னா, இங்கே ஒரு சார் எங்கள் அப்பா மாதிரியே ஒல்லியாக ஹைட்டாக இருக்கவும் அந்த யூனிஃபார்ம் போடும்போது டக்குன்னு எனக்கு எங்கள் அப்பா வந்துட்டார். சரி ஓகே, எங்கே இருந்தாலும் அப்பா நம்ம கூட தான் இருக்கார், அப்பா இருந்த இடம் இது அப்படின்ற மாதிரி ஃபீல் ஆச்சு மேம்.
நம்மளே மாறிக்கணும், நம்ம நிலைமையை வந்து அவ்வளோதான். ஆனால் இதுக்கு நம்ம இதை விட நமக்கு நல்ல லெவலில் வேலை இருக்குது, நம்ம குழந்தைங்கள படிக்க வைக்கணும் அப்படின்ற ஒரு ஃபீலிங்கில் இப்போ உற்சாகமாக நான் வரேன் மேம்.
கோவில் ஹாஸ்பிட்டலை தவிர வேறு எங்கேயும் நான் போக மாட்டேன். வீடு தான் எங்கள் வீட்டுக்காரர் தான் உலகம் அப்படின்னு தான் இருந்தேன். இப்போ எல்லாத்தையும் ஃபேஸ் பண்ணி இந்த அளவுக்கு இருக்கேன், வேலைக்கெலாம் வரேன், இவ்வளோ விஷயம் கற்றுக்கிட்டேன் அப்படின்னா அவங்களுக்கு தான் சொல்லணும். நானே திவ்யாவான்னு நானே யோசிக்கிறேன்.
At NLCIL, we make use of every adversity as an opportunity to reorient our stakeholders into happier, healthier beings living an enhanced quality of life. As the director, filming that was a very heartwarming experience. As we saw in the film, one of the girls were able to feel a sense of belonging with NLCIL because she was able to get connected to her deceased father by looking at someone wearing the NLCIL uniform. This only shows how elements of our environment are so entangled with our cognitive processes to form synchronous relationships. It also reiterates broader anthropological notions that we are deeply entangled with elements of our culture and that we are relational humans who are deeply connected. It also shows how relational human dignity is inextricably linked to the forming of the larger good, which in turn serves each one of us to unfold our human dignity. Now, the forming of this larger good, which aids in harmonious coexistence, can be mediated through two principles: solidarity and subsidiarity. Solidarity is the feeling of oneness with everything around, not just the person who's just sitting next to you, but the one who's even furthest from you spatially. Now, this kind of makes you responsible, keeping in mind that not only the present but also the future. Subsidiarity is that recognition that we are an agent. It's that awareness that we are just a small part of the whole. And so, we should operate keeping in mind the whole. Let me sign off by wishing once again, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let humanity awake. Thank you.